In this video, we're going to start looking at how to add the custom logic into your game. Lantern's got a basic understanding of open, close, put, take, drop, where, the verbs that you would expect to be to have in any adventure game. But you can add your own, and the minute you add your own, now you have to be able to add logic to the game. So let's look at how we do that. Now, the whole idea of these games is the player types something and then the game does something. So let's look at that mechanic of the player types something and then the game does something. That thing the player types, that's called a sentence. Put the present under the tree, right? That's or put the cat in the box or something. That's a sentence, right? There's a verb, and you could have other words that follow the verb, right? You could just have the verb like sneeze, or we could have what we just did, put the open the box, fix the engine with the wrench, right? Those are all kinds of the types of sentences we can make here. So we can select a verb from our drop down list. We can, and if there's another action or another noun that this thing applies to, like open the box or close the gate or something, we can supply that as the first object, and we can supply a preposition and a second object if we need to. So we can have just a verb, or we could have a verb and a noun, or we could have a verb and a noun and a preposition and a second noun, right? Put the present under the tree. That's an example of that. Now, let's assuming that the player types something. The player types in a command. Now the game has to do something, right? So what's that doing something? That's a function, right? So your sentences are going to call your functions. So the sentence is the combination of input that the player types, and the function is what happens when the player types that input. So we have to kind of wire these things together. So if you look at the sentence tab, you can say if the verb is something, something down here, you can say call a function, right? So you can make a function here and have it be called or have that code run when the player types something. So let's look at an example here. I'm going to launch the little test player, and I don't know, I'll call this I don't know, test 1 or something. Test 1. Okay. And now if I try to run this, there's my little pop-up window. This is a totally empty project. Now let's say I want to sneeze. It says I don't know the verb sneeze. Okay, great. Let's go at it. Now let me go into my verbs, and I'm going to type sneeze and add that to my list of verbs. So now I have, if I go back to my sentences, you should see that sneeze is down there in the list. So let's launch the player again and see what happens. I don't follow you, right? So we didn't build in any action for what happens when you sneeze, right? We didn't make a function that's supposed to be called when the player types sneeze. So let's go do that. So I'm going to go to functions here, and I'm going to add a new one. I'm going to call it sneeze. And what happens when the player sneezes, I'm just going to print at you. So to print a line of text, PR tab tab, that expands to print line. I'm going to say at you. There we go. File. Save. All right, now I'm going to test this again. I really need to reposition that window. Okay, so now if I sneeze, what happens? I don't follow you. Well, nothing, right? Nothing different. Why? Well, we wrote this sneeze function, but we're not using it. We have to do the next step of going to our sentences tab, and when we say when the verb is sneeze, call the sneeze function, right? So this is when the player types this, do this. Now, this causes some confusion. Before, after, and instead. Generally, you want to leave this as instead. I'm going to talk about before sentences and after sentences in a different video. That is more kind of like adding polish to something, to a project. Generally, you want to use instead. Instead is where you are kind of providing a default action or overriding the default action. So now let's click add, and you'll see we have a sentence here. So when we call the verb sneeze, we're going to call our sneeze function. So what we've written here is a kind of a mechanism that says when the player types sneeze, instead of doing whatever you were going to do, call the sneeze function instead. Right, so maybe now why instead? So imagine, there's a raincoat or something, or I don't know, whatever. There's a cloak, and we wear the cloak. Well, the game is going to understand how to wear something, but maybe we want something special to happen, like the player becomes invisible, or there something happens. So that's where we can provide a sentence to do instead of the built-in action. So now let's run our game and see what happens. Let's launch the player here. And now I'm going to type sneeze. And it says achoo, right? Because when we added the verb sneeze, and then when we say, okay, when the player types sneeze, call the sneeze function. And then the sneeze function just says print out achoo. All right. So now let's just make this just a little more interesting. Let's make the game track how many times we've sneezed. So I'm going to go to my variables tab, and I'm going to add one called sneeze count. So a variable can store a value between 0 up to and including 255. Variables are stored, it's a single byte of memory, and they're just kind of limited to that, and that actually doesn't seem to mention that limitation. So I'm going to add a variable called sneeze count, and I'm going to set it to 0. And now let's go back to that sentence here, or the function. So after we sneeze, let's check to see what the sneeze, let's add 1 to the sneeze count. So sneeze count plus plus. That's the syntax for adding 1 to a variable. Or we could also say sneeze count equals sneeze count plus 1. That's kind of the longhand way of writing that out. So, oh, great, there's the dog. So there's the single equal sign means take the expression on the right, evaluate it, and assign it to the thing on the left. So take whatever sneeze count is, add 1 to it, and assign it back to sneeze count. All right. And now let's check to see what sneeze count is. So to make we'll say if sneeze count is 3, print bless you. So how do we write that? Well, Lantern's got a whole lot of kind of like code stubs built in for it. So if you type the word if and hit tab twice, it will stub out an if statement for you. And in here, we're going to test what the value of sneeze count is. We'll say if sneeze count is equal to 3. Now, when you're testing for equality, it's 2 equal signs. The double equal sign means test for equality. So when you're doing an assignment, you're changing the value of a variable, that's 1 equal sign. When you're testing the value of a variable, that's 2 equal signs. So let's print out the word bless you. Bless you. And then let's set sneeze count back to 0. Otherwise, it'll just keep ticking up and it'll never say bless you again. Sneeze count equals 0. All right, so if sneeze count is 3, print bless you and set sneeze count back to 0. Now let's run this. All right, sneeze. Achoo, sneeze. Achoo, sneeze. Ah, achoo, bless you. Okay, right, so if I try sneeze again, sneeze count should have been set back to 0. Actually, if I type the word vars in the little terminal, it will show me the value of all my variables. And we can see there that sneeze count is equal to 1. So, so that is a very simple example of how to write a function and how to wire it up to a sentence. So that's what you have to keep in mind here, is that the functions and sentences work together. So the function is the thing that's going to happen in your game, or the function is the thing that's going to happen in your game, and the sentence is the combination of words that the player is going to type to make that thing happen. Now, it's worth mentioning here that you could have many, many, many sentences all call the same function. So think about like maybe I have a sci-fi game and I want to shoot the pistol at the guard, or kill the guard with the pistol, or fire the pistol at the guard. Right? There's a whole lot of ways I could express that idea, but it's all the same thing, right? The same thing's going to happen either way. So you can have many, many, many sentences all call the same function. And that's a good idea, because a player there may be many ways to express an idea to make something happen in your game. And if the way that idea is being expressed, that sentence is reasonable, then it should have the right effect. It should be called, it should call the right function. Excuse me, losing my voice. So that's it. So now in the next video, what we're going to do is look at writing a function and a sentence that requires like a direct object or a noun. So we'll try to like kick the can or something. And then this is going to bring in some other concepts, the concept of verb checks, right? Like what has to happen before I call the function. We didn't have anything like that in this example, right? All we did was create a function and wire it up to a sentence, and that sentence was just sneeze. And so we said when the verb is sneeze, call the sneeze function. All right. So in other videos here, we're going to look at kind of making more complicated sentences, and we'll get into when you might want to use a before sentence and when you might want to use an after sentence, because those can make your game just a little more polished. All right, well, there it is. So if you have any questions, email me, evanw@tcdupage.org, or message me through Schoology, and I'll be happy to come and lift the veil, any veil of confusion that may be hovering over you.